We all know what it's like to struggle to do the right thing. Maybe we offer to help our friends move on the weekend, but then when Saturday comes around, we really don't feel like it, so we have to force ourselves to go help them. Maybe because it's the right thing to do, because we made a promise, and even if we don't feel like going, we know that we should, ultimately. But maybe there were some other motivations mixed in there too, like, I don't want my friend to dislike me, or maybe I want my friend to do something nice for me because I helped them out. And if that's the case, then maybe you did the right thing, but it might not have been completely for the right reason. There was a bit of self-interest mixed in there too. And in fact, as philosophers have noticed, it seems like it might even just be impossible for a purely morally good deed to ever be done. So there's a sense in which genuine morality might just be impossible. But if morality is impossible, then why do we care so much about it? And if it's impossible, how do we even know that it exists? These kinds of questions led the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant to develop one of the most influential moral theories in all of philosophy. Today we'll break down his ideas about morality as simply as we possibly can, so we can understand why Kant thought that, in fact, morality is impossible, but it's still really important. Okay, so what is morality? Well, there are all different definitions of morality, but today we'll just focus on the way that I think Kant is thinking about morality. So morality refers to actions that we do for a very special kind of reason. Reasons explain our actions in ways that they don't explain the actions of other beings. That's just what it means to be rational. We go to the gym because we want to work out. We take our dogs to the vet because they're sick. But moral reasons for action are special. There's something distinctive about how they work. And Kant noticed this, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. So he focused on a couple features of morality to come up with a general theory of how the whole thing works. So first of all, he noticed that moral reasons have an ability to influence us in a way that overwhelms all of our other concerns. So no matter how badly I don't want to go help my friend move this weekend, I still have a moral reason to go do it because I made a promise. And a promise carries moral weight. And this is why morality often gets spoken of in terms of duties. Like I have a duty to keep my promises, or a duty to protect the innocent, which means I'm going to do those things no matter how I feel that day. Our moral reasons don't care about our particular circumstances or our situations. They have an overwhelming power as reasons for actions. And the other thing Kant noticed is that these duties can be invented out of thin air by any rational being. A duty to keep a promise doesn't exist until I make a promise. And once I've made that commitment to keep a promise, it doesn't matter how I feel, it doesn't matter what comes up, it doesn't matter what gets in the way. I'm still obligated. I have a duty to keep that promise, no matter what. And Kant also noticed that any rational being is capable of doing this. So the key point is that morality is universal, meaning it doesn't care about the particulars of our situations, and it's intimately tied to rationality. So because of the close connection between morality and rationality, Kant decided that morality must be able to be explained by the rules of rationality itself. And the question is how? How does our capacity for reasoning give rise to universal moral laws? Well, it's a very complicated story that takes place in a book called The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. So the way that reason gives rise to morality is through imperatives. Now, imperative is just a fancy way of saying command, but I like to also think of it as a reason. I could say that I have a reason to go to school, I have an imperative to go to school, or I am being commanded to go to school. All three of those things sort of get at the same idea. There's some force pushing me to go to school. Now, most imperatives are what Kant calls hypothetical, meaning that the imperatives depend on our goals. So I only have a reason to go to school if going to school is going to help me do something else, like become successful, or become rich, or get smarter. The imperative only applies if I have a suitable goal that the imperative will help me reach. And there are infinitely many of these hypothetical imperatives, as many of them as there are goals we could possibly have. But there's one kind of imperative that doesn't care about our goals, and that is the categorical imperative. It's the kind of reason you have for doing something when you don't have any reason to do it but the dictates of reason itself. Moral duties are categorical imperatives. And one of the main goals of the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals is to show how categorical imperatives come about, how they are possible. Now, the categorical imperative may be tricky to describe, but whatever it is, it will be the ultimate moral principle. It's definitely going to apply universally to all rational beings. And this itself is a valuable fact in thinking about morality. Whatever morality is, it has to be universally applicable. And this leads directly to Kant's first formulation of the categorical imperative, which is, I ought never to act in such a way that I couldn't also will that the maxim on which I act should be a universal law. Now that's a very abstract and Kantian way of putting it, but it just means that whatever I do that's morally good has to apply as morally good in any and all situations. Now Kant goes on to describe two other versions of the categorical imperative, and each of these ways of describing it help fill it out a little bit more. The second version of the categorical imperative states that we have to treat all human beings as ends in themselves and never merely as a means to an end. Now it takes a couple steps to get here, but an end in itself is basically something with intrinsic value, meaning that it isn't only derivatively valuable because it helps you get something. We must, in accordance with the categorical imperative, treat all human beings as intrinsically valuable, because human beings as rational beings are capable of creating their own goals. And by virtue of being able to create their own goals, they are themselves valuable intrinsically, not as a means to some other goal. So this helps us to understand why it's wrong to lie to people. Because when we lie to somebody, we're treating them as a tool, as something we can use to help achieve our own goals, not as something with goals of their own. The third version of the categorical imperative emphasizes how we are all rational law givers and law receivers in this community of human beings, which he calls the kingdom of ends, or the realm of ends. So this references the fact that we are all in this together, that it's not just one rational being that's responsible for morality, but we all are in this process of creating duties for ourselves and obeying those duties that we create for ourselves as part of a community of rational beings. Now, there are all sorts of details about how you get from one version of the categorical imperative to the other, but the bottom line is this. Kant's theory helps us to understand morality as a special, overwhelming kind of reason that we have for actions that applies universally to all rational beings, by virtue purely of the fact that they are rational beings. Morality offers us a universal set of reasons to act in any circumstance. So let's get back to the original question. Why is morality impossible? Well, even though Kant thinks that this categorical imperative is sort of hardwired into our rational faculty, he doesn't think there's ever a situation where it's the only thing that's motivating us. Life is just too messy and complicated for us to ever make decisions in accordance with the categorical imperative and nothing else. To act on purely moral reasons and no practical or self-interested reasons. And as a result, according to Kant, we are never really moral. Morality is impossible. And if you think that's weird, just follow me here. Think about the idea of a perfect circle. Now, we all know the formula for a perfect circle, or at least we should. And we should also be aware that there is no such thing in the real world as a perfect circle. And this is because no matter how close you get to a perfect circle in the real world, at the microscopic level, there's always going to be some sort of imperfection. But that's no reason to think that the definition of a perfect circle is wrong. We still try to make things circular to the best of our ability, even if the ideal of a perfect circle is just that, an ideal. Morality is kind of like that. It's an ideal. It's something that we strive for, even though in the real messy world that we all find ourselves in, it's not really possible. So we can think of the categorical imperative as like the moral equivalent of the formula for a perfect circle. Now that's Kant's moral theory, as simply as I can possibly put it, and I think it's pretty compelling. It does a great job of explaining why we care about the fact that we do things for the right reasons when we do morally good things. Even if our reasons for action can't be perfectly moral, it's still better if they're kinda moral than if they're not moral at all. Like if you show up to your friend's house partly because it's the right thing to do, and not just because they promise to give you some money, you're morally better off than the case would be if you just showed up for the money. And this helps us to explain why we feel the pull of morality even when we don't really want to do the morally right thing. We feel that pull because it's built into our very rationality itself. It doesn't matter what we want because that's not how morality works. Morality doesn't care about that. Morality tells us what to do regardless of our goals. And that's kind of how it feels. So it has pretty good intuitive appeal in that respect too. If we're rational beings at all, then we're going to be affected at least somewhat by the pull of morality. Now, there are plenty of problems with this theory. This is totally a charitable, one-sided presentation of Kant's moral theory just to give it the best possible case that we could give it. But I'd love to hear in the comments below about whether or not you agree with Kant's theory. There's no shortage of criticisms, believe me. And whether you believe Kant's theory or not, I hope you leave with a better understanding of it. And if you learned something, be sure to like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.